Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're looking at a case that is, well, it's incredibly difficult to comprehend, but absolutely crucial to understand. We're analyzing the tragedy of Junko Furuta. In the history of modern crime, there are certain events that are so disturbing they just echo through the decades. They challenge everything we thought we knew about safety, community, and the justice system. This isn't just another true crime story. It's a profound sociological look into bystander intervention, juvenile law, and honestly, society's breaking points. So let's unpack this systemic awakening together.
So how did an ordinary girl's disappearance become a massive turning point for an entire nation's justice system? That's the main question we're answering today. How does one horrific event literally rewrite the rules of a country? Over 30 years later, the ripples of this specific case are still being felt by police, journalists, and legal experts, not just in Japan, but all over the world. We're going to break down exactly what happened, why the system failed so catastrophically, and look at the intense debates it sparked that are still raging today.
Okay, Section 1. The ordinary teenager. Let's look at who Junko was before the tragedy.
Growing up during Japan's booming, optimistic economic bubble of the 1980s, Junko was basically a perfect reflection of her generation's hopes. Friends, teachers, everyone described her as polite, hardworking, and just incredibly responsible. She kept her grades up, worked a part-time job after school. She really wasn't looking for fame or trouble. She just had ordinary, beautiful dreams. But directly opposed to her bright future was this much darker reality. A group of teenage delinquents who were already deeply steeped in violent behavior and even connected to organized crime. This tragic collision of two completely different worlds, that's what sets the stage for everything that follows.
Moving to Section 2, the disappearance. November 25, 1988.
On what started as a completely ordinary Friday evening, Junko finished her shift at her part-time job and was heading home through the Tokyo suburbs. It's a route so many people took every single day without a second thought. But on this particular night, her path crossed with those young men, leading to her abduction on November 25th. They took her to a house owned by one of the perpetrator's families. Now, the duration of her captivity is just agonizing. From late November all the way to early January, that's over a month. Her captors actually forced her to send misleading messages to her family, making it sound like she had run away voluntarily. This absolute nightmare culminated in her tragic death on January 4th, but the grim discovery wouldn't even happen until weeks later.
Which brings us to Section 3, the bystander failure, a community's silence. This is exactly where the story shifts from being just a horrific crime to a massive systemic breakdown. Because while Junko was being held captive in that suburban house, she actually wasn't in total isolation. Over those long weeks, multiple people, we're talking visitors, family members living under that very same roof, and even neighbors who saw unusual things, reportedly realized that something was terribly wrong. Which leads us to this haunting question. Why didn't someone try harder to help? Why not just make an anonymous call to the police? Try to put yourself in the shoes of a society desperately trying to understand this. How does an entire micro-community just fail to step in while a 17-year-old girl is held captive?
Well, the sociology behind this bystander inaction is incredibly complex, and it really comes down to deep-rooted fear. The perpetrators relied heavily on intimidation. They had a known reputation for violence in the area and openly bragged about their ties to criminal organizations. People who could have intervened later came forward and said they were literally terrified of severe retaliation against themselves or their own families. Now, whether that immense fear justifies the inaction, well, that's a subject of intense, ongoing debate among criminologists and the public to this day. We're not here to pass judgment, but we absolutely have to understand the mechanics of how fear can completely paralyze a community.
Let's look at Section 4, Discovery and National Shock, a nation horrified. Because these perpetrators had gone undetected for so long, they actually developed this reckless sense of untouchability, and ironically, that's what brought them down. In late January 1989, police arrested one of them for a totally unrelated crime. During routine questioning, a tiny thread emerged. Investigators pulled that thread, followed the leads, and finally uncovered the heartbreaking reality of Junko's disappearance. She was only 17 years old, just 17. When the public learned what she endured, it was earth-shattering. TV stations interrupted their programming. Newspapers wiped their front pages. You have to remember, Japan was a nation that prided itself on extremely low crime rates and a strong sense of community safety. This brutal revelation completely shattered those comforting assumptions overnight.
Section 5, the juvenile justice debate, a system challenged.
So that national shock very quickly boiled over into an explosive legal controversy. Courtrooms were absolutely packed, and legal experts were dissecting every single detail on national TV. But the real shockwave hit when the public fully realized that the perpetrators were all juveniles. This one fact ignited a total firestorm. Under Japanese law at the time, juvenile offenders were granted heavy legal protections, like hidden identities, with a huge emphasis on rehabilitation rather than punishment. But man, the public demand clashed violently with this system. Citizens and journalists were outraged. They argued that a crime this extraordinarily brutal demanded strict accountability, published identities, and severe punishment. Some journalists even defied the law and printed their names anyway. It was this massive clash between established legal doctrine and a raw, visceral demand for immediate justice.
The public's frustration was really perfectly captured by one prevailing thought. The crime seemed so severe that no finite prison term could ever feel sufficient. When sentencing finally happened, the principal offender got the longest term, and the others got shorter sentences. And sure, while those were significant sentences within the strict boundaries of Japan's juvenile system, the public felt deeply betrayed. That frustration only compounded years later, when the perpetrators finished their sentences and were simply released back into society. It sparked endless debates that we still see today. Was justice truly served for Junko?
Let's turn to Section 6, A Stolen Future, the Irreplaceable Loss.
While everyone debated legal systems, juvenile reform, and sociological failures, Junko's family was left with an irreplaceable void. Amidst all the courtroom drama and the media frenzy, we have to remember the ordinary, beautiful life at the center of it all. She should have graduated, those simple milestones of youth, walking across a stage, holding a diploma, taking goofy photos with friends. All of that was violently taken from her.
She should have built a career. As the years ticked by, the rest of the world just moved forward. Criminologists studied her case, journalists wrote books. Her own friends grew up, found jobs, and started families. Junko was permanently robbed of every single one of those fundamental human experiences.
She should have created her own future. More than 3 decades later, Junko Furuta's name is known globally. And she shouldn't be remembered because of the criminals who harmed her. She should be remembered because she was a real person, an ordinary teenager with big dreams, ambitions, and an entire life ahead of her. Her life mattered.
Which leaves us with a final, incredibly vital question. How can society ensure that fear never again silences the courage to protect the vulnerable? Junko's story is a stark, lasting reminder that cruelty flourishes in the shadows of an action. As we close out this explainer, I really encourage you to reflect on this. How do we build communities where accountability, courage, and compassion finally outweigh fear? Thank you so much for joining me on this difficult but deeply essential journey today.